Today we're getting under the hood of pelvic pain with Sabrina, a mixed race, Black, queer, trans psychotherapist specializing in chronic pain. What is pelvic pain?
Pelvic pain refers to any kind of pain, either acute or chronic, that typically tends to happen below the belly button, right? So when we hear the sort of umbrella phrase of pelvic pain, we're thinking things like groin pain, genital pain, bladder pain. This could be, right? There can be genital dermatological conditions, right? So, lichen sclerosis, right? We're really thinking of um any chronic feeling that diverts from one's normal equilibrium in their body that has to do suprapubic and below. So really beginning with the belly button and on down. There are many drivers of pelvic pain. It is not a question that has a linear answer very often. At times, you could have a UTI that can lead to pelvic pain, right? The common frequency, urgency, dysuria. Sometimes it's endometriosis, right? So a condition where folks might often report intense pelvic pain adjacent to their menstrual cycles, but not limited to that, right? Pelvic pain is anything and everything that spans between feeling like something is amiss, intolerable, off with any one of the organs that are below the belly button. Pelvic pain can be bladder pain. Pelvic pain can be penile pain or pain while having an erection. Pelvic pain can be labial pain. It can be labial itching. It can be a tugging at the bottom of the pelvis, right? Pelvic pain can be groin pain, inguinal canal pain. It can be any number of these experiences. It can even include hip pain. It can even include, right, lower extremity pain that's connected to one of those organs that I stated. So pelvic pain spans a vast territory, right? It has a texture geography, and it'll look different depending on who you ask.
What is causing my pelvic pain?
So the causes of pelvic pain are often multifaceted and can span everything and anything from infectious causes like a UTI, bacterial vaginosis, an STI, all the way to things that fall under autoimmune categories, fall under physical injury categories, can fall under things like pregnancy, things like hormonal fluctuations. And can also be connected to dermatological conditions, can be connected to dancing, different forms of movement. Sometimes athletes can report various kinds of pelvic pain or are more prone to things like hernias or inguinal canal pain. Right? So the cause can come from many different places. Sometimes there are inflammatory causes. Sometimes there are infectious causes. And sometimes trauma is a cause, right? Sometimes the upregulation of the nervous system is often a cause. And we notice things like chronic regional pain syndrome or sexual assaults, rapes leading to pelvic pain. So I'd say the answer to that is multifaceted, and there are many causes, many of which we still do not know or understand today.
How do I know if my pain is normal or if I should seek medical help?
Love this question. I think the answer to this question begins with what has been your baseline? What is something that you have known to be part of your daily ecosystem of homeostasis, right? Like what feels intuitively correct in your body and what now has shifted or pivoted outside of that window. So I like to think of it as the window of tolerance, which is a therapeutic term. And all of us operate within a window of tolerance, right? And the window of tolerance is just a fancy way of saying our ability to handle and manage things that will happen to us in any given day. You might be on a crowded subway, you might be irritated, people might be pushing into you, on top of you. It's hot, it's May, you're in New York City, but you manage it. It's in your window of tolerance. Now, let's say something pushes you outside of that window of tolerance, right? And it flings you into a state of hyperarousal or hypoarousal. Well, then you might not be in that window of tolerance anymore. You might be activated. You might notice that you're maybe yelling at the person, cursing at the person, right? You're no longer now in that window of how can I manage this? How can I move through this? How can I use my resources to not let this moment ruin my whole day and take me out? So I use that example with pelvic pain because I think there's often a baseline and a window of tolerance, and then slowly it'll creep up on us often. Something will happen where that's not quite in our window anymore, right? There's a symptom, there's a gut feeling, there's new pain, there's an onset of a sensation or of a feeling or of a signaling that we're not familiar with. And that I think is key in time for me to go to a doctor or even just bring up the symptom to a medical professional. Now, as an aside, I think in the realm of pelvic pain, many women and AFAB folks are taught that pain is normal. We are taught that our cycles should be painful, that sex is going to be painful, right? We're told so many different narratives about what we should or shouldn't expect about any one of these organs or bodily processes, right? And so I think that's where the asterisks come in. Now, sure, could a certain amount of pain be part of any biological process? Absolutely. But if the pain is taking you away from work, if the pain is taking you away from school, if the pain is taking you away from yourself in a profound way, then I think it begs a deeper question where it's like, okay, I'm not in the window of tolerance that I'm used to, and I need to go seek insight, clarity, and understanding about what could be happening.
What tests or exams can diagnose the root cause of my pelvic pain?
Great question. So oftentimes there can be a wonderful repertoire of things that you can do to get a better understanding of how you might be functioning outside of that window of tolerance, right? So things like MRIs, things like EMGs, things like cystoscopies, things like getting a really comprehensive pelvic exam by a provider, right? Somebody who can really feel the trigone of the bladder, somebody who can assess the tissue, somebody who can assess the pelvic floor muscles. Going to see a pelvic floor physical therapist is an excellent way to get a better understanding of what might be happening to you, right? A prolapse, possibly, right? So I'd say it's going to be a combination of exams, imaging, maybe certain blood work, biomarkers, right? Sometimes clinicians will put in for C-reactive protein. They'll try to measure inflammation. They'll try to, do ANA titers and measure, autoimmune panels. Other times it'll be biopsies. Other times it will be CAT scans, ultrasounds, transvaginal ultrasounds, right? Sometimes it will be, a urine test, a specialized urine test that can pick up more nuancedly, right? Like a PCR urine test, right? So I think it's going to be all of that. But I think aside from that, the best thing that actually helps to diagnose pelvic pain is a provider who listens, is a provider who is really thoughtfully listening carefully to what the patient is saying. And then from there, looping in the appropriate vehicles through which further insight can be cultivated, right? So listening comes first, really understanding what the patient is saying, and I think also doing a really thorough pelvic exam, right? Sometimes people do the Q-tip test to rule in or rule out vestibule pain or vulvodynia or clitoral pain, right? Sometimes people will do a whole assessment of the pelvic floor and to see if folks have trigger points or to see if they are tight in certain areas or to see if they can bear down, do a full diaphragmatic breath, if they can do a Kegel, right? So I think it's going to be a cocktail of all of those.
Can pelvic pain be treated without surgery or medication?
Pelvic pain can absolutely be treated without medication or surgery. I would say that it all depends on the kind of pelvic pain that the individual is experiencing. I think it also depends on what their root cause or root causes might be. And then I think it also depends on what the client is seeking. What is a priority for them? is a priority for them to heal and access pleasure again or access neutrality again in their body without surgery or medication? If yes, then that already opens up a portal to possibility and play in that area, right? Um, Will we see varying results? Maybe, right? There's no saying that surgery or medication is better or worse. I think it's a deeply personal question. My answer is yes, though. I think yes. If a client comes to me and says, Sabrina, I'm having debilitating pelvic pain, but I really am not open to more, more extreme intervention or interventions that feel uncomfortable for me, like surgeries or even medications or even physical therapy, which is quite intimate, right? Then I say, okay, let's see what we can do. But you already gave me your yes. And that yes is a ticket into a transportable playground that we can use to try and assess, okay, well, what other modalities of healing have we neglected to look at, right? And so I think the answer is definitely yes. But it depends on the person, it depends on what is happening, and it depends on, I think, sort of the perfect confluence of the factors at play.
How does my menstrual cycle impact pelvic pain, and what can I do about it?
So the menstrual cycle is often dubbed as something that can be a really wonderful marker for a lot of insight and data about where our pain might be originating from, how it might change, how it might develop, how it might evolve throughout a month, right? And so, I think to answer that question, oftentimes people will report a worsening of pelvic pain near and around their menstrual cycle. Why is this? Well, there are a lot of theories around declining estrogen during that luteal phase of the menstrual cycle, right? Second half of the cycle. And there are some theories that this fluctuation of estrogen can sometimes cause an influx of pain and can activate pain signals, right? Other times, the menstrual cycle can be connected to really painful periods, and that sometimes can be its own separate pain generator, right? Especially in the context of things like interstitial cystitis or endometriosis or adenomyosis, right? So there are things like that that we see sometimes. Other times, people can be in perimenopause, people can be at any stage of the hormonal spectrum. And again, right, we still don't know all the way how and why and through which vehicles these hormones can impact pain, but we do know that the menstrual cycle is often a biomarker for something. Not always, but often. To answer your question about what you can do about it, well, there are so many things we can do about it, right? Ranging from birth control options to keep your hormones at a steady state, all the way to things like seed cycling, where you take different seeds during different parts of the cycle in an effort to help your cycles be optimized, in an effort to help your hormones be optimized, right? So you take specific seeds, whether that's pumpkin seeds, right? Walnuts, it could be, chia seeds, flax seeds, whether you take that follicular stage, ovulatory stage, luteal phase, right? Menstrual phase, right? You can do seed cycling. You can play with food. You can play with eliminating things like gluten, dairy. You can think about from a conscious perspective, well, what foods help me feel better during my menstrual cycle? What foods are neutral for me? What foods do I notice make no difference? What foods make things worse? Do spices make things worse? Does coffee make things worse? Does alcohol make things worse, right? Does refined or artificial or processed sugars or sweeteners make things worse, right? Another thing could be, okay, what can I do? What resources are available to me so that I can help myself? Whether that's ranging from stretching, PT, getting on YouTube and following a couple of cat cows, happy babies, child's pose, cobras, whether that's an Epsom salt bath, whether that's using a pelvic wand to release some of that tightness that one might notice increases during their menstrual cycle, right? So I think it's, again, another combination of for every person, it's going to look different. But the menstrual cycle is indeed part of a larger mosaic of hormones working in concert with one another. And oftentimes, the subtle shifts and divots and changes can lead to pain or can just lead to symptoms that we otherwise might not notice outside of that luteal phase, outside of that menstrual phase.
How does stress or trauma contribute to pelvic pain?
So, stress and trauma, two different things, but very connected, contribute to pelvic pain because of the way that stress and trauma change how we live and breathe in our nervous system. And stress, and nobody is immune to stress, right? But stress upregulates the nervous system. Stress heightens us. It often pushes us in states of hyper or hypoarousal. And because of that, there then exists this cycle where pain, tension, tightness, constriction, anything and everything, whether it's anxiety, worry, all of the external facing experiences that we might know and can name, they all sort of come together and meet one another in the body, right? And so when stress is activated, or when stress is not regulated, or when stress is overwhelming us, it's extremely hard to ground, which then makes it extremely hard for our bodies to be anchored and to ground with us. Adjacent to that exists trauma, right? And trauma is a biological event. This is something that I explain to my patients, right? Trauma really happens inside of the body, right? The process of trauma happens on a cellular level, right? And our nervous system remembers trauma. It can remember traumatic moments. It often remembers, right? And even if the trigger is not present, even if the traumatic moment um, is not, right? Even if there's many, many years between you and the traumatic moment, the nervous system can still remember the moments as if they were happening in real time, right? And so what does that mean? It means that trauma and stress guard up the body, uptick the central nervous system, and disallow us to drop in from a grounded and anchored somatic place, which then leads us to often get dysregulated, overwhelmed, and burnt out. And when we are burnt out, overwhelmed, and dysregulated, the body responds. The body often tells us that we are in concert with that noticing. I don't meet too many people that tell me, wow, my life is in shambles and I'm in the best shape of my life. My body is rocking it, right? I seldom hear that. And the body, I like, this physical carriage that we all have, it catches up. It knows. It has its own language. It's coding its own language, I believe. And it's noticing everything as we consciously are noticing everything. And so, the perfect storm of stress and trauma can really lead to clenching of the pelvic floor. It can lead to straining during urination or defecation, right? It can just cause you to be overrun by anxiety, right? By overwhelm. And you can lose that connection and that dialogue with the body. And I think that's why it is often a perfect equation to exacerbate pelvic pain.
Can anxiety and depression make my pain worse?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anxiety and depression can absolutely make pain worse. Right? Depression can often deactivate us, right? Sometimes it's beyond a loss of pleasure in things. Sometimes it is beyond a sadness or a disconnection or an isolation from self and others. Sometimes it's merely just a state of numbness. Sometimes it's a state of utter deactivation where it's not quite an emptiness, but what we know to fill us feels distant and elusive, and we can't quite grasp it or hold on to it. And that in turn can lead us to miscues in our body. That in turn can lead us to not have the energy or to have the executive functioning needed to take care of our bodies, to tend to our bodies, to feed ourselves, to hydrate ourselves, to move ourselves, to stretch ourselves. And without all of those quadrants, pelvic pain can exacerbate. If we're not eating right, if we're not moving, if we're not hydrating, all of these things that are necessary to live and to live well can absolutely affect pelvic pain and how our body is actually processing pain. Depression also, because it is often a state of lull, disconnection, um, dislocation, right? That can also amplify the sound of pain, When we are distracted, when we are accessing joy, when we are able to remember what fills us, what inspires us, what activates us, pain often can dull. I'm not saying it goes away, but the audio of pain can be turned down when we are in concert with spirit and what alivens us on the planet, right? So when we have depression interfacing with that, pain can be amped up, right? And the soundtrack of that pain can be one that you even forgot existed, right? Because depression can often mute color and can mute the color in things. Anxiety, similar. Right? So often worry, fear, hypervigilance, hyperfixation, catastrophizing, right? And a little bit of anxiety is neuroprotective, is what I tell my patients, right? All of us will always have some degree of bioprotective anxiety, right? It's that voice inside of us that alerts us when something's wrong, when something doesn't feel right, when someone's trying to take advantage of us, right? Any number of those things. But when anxiety is, again, outside of that window of tolerance, we can see the pelvic floor responding via clenching, via tightening, via hesitation to urinate, pain during intercourse, right? And so I think both of these mental health experiences and conditions absolutely take place in the body and absolutely speak back to one another in the context of pelvic pain.
How can I talk to my doctor if I feel dismissed or unheard?
Excellent question. And if not, arguably the most important one, the most critical one to our pain and us getting on a trajectory of wellness and getting better. So, if we are feeling dismissed, gaslit, invalidated, neglected, erased, any number of those words, the first thing that I invite my patients to do is to pause and to affirm the experience and the insight and the intuition that you just had. Before you do anything, recognize that it happened and recognize that it's real. I think so often we're noticing being dismissed, we're noticing being gaslit, but there's a tendency often to second guess it, to perhaps think that we are the problem, or to perhaps jump to defense of the provider, right? Or to just jump to a state when where we are inevitably dismissing our own lived experience of what just happened. So I always invite my clients to first just pause, affirm yourself, clock that it happened, and just stay in that for a moment. Second thing is, I always invite my clients to respectfully invite your provider into that insight. When you meet with the provider, it is a chance for you to assert exactly the type of care you are looking for. I'm not saying that asserting it will mean that you will get that care, but it's always an opportunity to practice really thinking about what's going to make this therapeutic container safe, accessible, and good for you. And you always are entitled to bring that up with any provider that you meet, right? And so calling in the provider can look like, hey, the way that you just shared that really didn't land with me. When I was talking to you about my chronic burning, it almost felt like you were brushing that off as something normal and something that every woman goes through. I want to pause and really reiterate that this burning has not been normal for me. It's something that has greatly disrupted my life, my quality of life, my quality of pleasure, my access to pleasure. And I would really appreciate it if we could return back to that and talk about other pathways to diagnosing what this might be and what we can do to alleviate my symptoms. Boom. So I tell people you don't have to claw at the doctor. You don't have to curse at the doctor. You don't have to make excuses for the doctor, but you can actually, in plain English, quite boldly step into a place of power and say, what you said left me feeling. When you shared this, it left me feeling like this. When you proposed birth control, that option is not aligned with something that I want. Can we please pivot and talk about other alternatives that feel more aligned with me and what I'm looking for? When I mentioned that the pain is a 10 out of 10 and I can't go to work and you smirked and laughed, it made me feel like you didn't really think my pain was as serious as I'm describing. In order for me to have a safe, um, in order for me to have a safe therapeutic patient-provider relationship with you, it's really important that you take my experiences at face value and that you affirm them and that you don't make me feel like I'm exaggerating them. How do you feel about what I'm saying? That's another key part, right? So you say all of that. And then at the end, you want to make sure that the provider is giving you a response that honors the courage, the boldfulness, the bravery that it just took for you to step into that space and to curate that dynamic, which, quite frankly, patients should not have to do, right? But we don't live in a perfect world. So when patients do this, right, when they muster up all the strength, when they're already probably exhausted, when they've already had to take sick time off for that appointment, when they're already probably calling insurances, working it out, paying their copay, the last thing they need is to be invalidated or to feel as though they're being neglected or that their pain is being neglected. And so I always tell folks after you call the provider in, get a recap at the end and make sure that the provider has acknowledged that, has owned that, has validated that, and make sure you leave on a page that feels suitable for you. And if you don't, you always have the right to ask for a referral and to share about the experience that you had. You are picking a provider. The provider is not picking you. You are picking the provider. And you have every right to pick providers that make you feel safe and that honor the wholeness of who you are and of what you're coming in with.
How do I manage intimacy and relationships when I'm in pain?
Number one is to always be honest and be transparent about your experience. In order to make intimacy and relationships accessible, joyful, in order to make them ones that honor you, start by being authentic and naming your truth. The truth is that you have pelvic pain, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing to hide. It's a part of you, and you deserve intimacy and relationships that are going to honor that and honor you in that. Be authentic, be transparent, state what you need, give feedback accordingly. And if somebody is doing something in a way that doesn't feel pleasurable, that activates pain, that doesn't make you feel safe or held in a container of acceptance, call that in, name it, and move accordingly.
5 tips on how to manage pelvic pain.
5 tips. First tip is going to be accept that you have pelvic pain. Accept that it is part of your journey, your story. Accept that it is likely going to be a chronic experience and that that doesn't need to mean that we need to fear it forever or be mongered by it or feel like our life is over because of it. First step that I always invite my patients to think about is accepting it, right? What does it mean to just radically accept that this thing now is part of me and it's here to stay, most likely. And how can I just hold that? Number two, what are ways to help my pelvic pain and still allow me to have an accessible, joyful, abundant life, right? So whether that means planning bathroom trips as you travel, whether that means having a safety pelvic resource bag on the go so that you always have resources and tools to help calm you in flares as you move along, whether that means naming it to all of your providers so that they know and can help you and can synthesize that information in pregnancies, in surgeries, and anything that you might have, right? It's all about how can I now that I've accepted this, what can I do about it? What's at my disposal? What's at my disposal? And if something's not, how can I get it? How can I advocate for it? How can I make myself get it in a way that honors me and honors my values? Third thing, pelvic pain, or third thing that I think to think a tip to manage pelvic pain is to think about all of the things that still remain the same in your life, regardless of pelvic pain. What actually hasn't changed, regardless of this diagnosis? You're still a writer. You're still an artist. You're still a dancer. You're still a daughter, maybe. You're still a lover, right? You're still a human being. What has remained the same, right? And I'm being not to be reductive when I say that. Sure, all parts of life can be touched by illness, can be touched by chronic diseases, can be touched by pelvic pain. But what actually, what has pelvic pain not stolen from you, right? What can you remember that you still have that's still yours to claim and say yes to? Fourth tip, remember that it's not always going to be bad. You are going to have months where flares are not as bad, where you might even forget for a day or two that you have pelvic pain. There are going to be moments where things work, things surprise you. New interventions are being worked on all the time, right? New theories, new articles, new science, new research, new brains, right? New creativity, right? So, what are ways to think about that and to rejoice in that? Right? And what are ways to practice gratitude for the days where it's not so catastrophic? It's not grabbing you by the throat as fiercely. Where maybe you had sex and it really wasn't as painful and that was a win. Like, oh my God, that was awesome, right? So what are ways to drop into this notion that pain is not linear? Right? And that means that healing can arrive. Allow yourself to be surprised. Fifth tip. Remember that you are still a person worthy of living a bountiful and incredible life. Your life does not need to be reduced to pelvic pain. Pelvic pain is simply just that, and it does not need to color who you are. It does not need to color what life you're going to live. Right? It might inform those things, but does it have to steal them and take them away? No, no. Remember that. There's enough things in the planet that are going to steal you away from you. Enough violence, enough harm, enough systems of hatred that will do that. Ready to go? Don't let pelvic pain be another system that does that.